The Buffalo Bills are an NFL buzzsaw, and Josh Allen is the MVP. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today as I am every Monday by Locked On NFL expert Geno Camilleri. On today's episode, we're going to talk about some major quarterback injuries, including Patrick Mahomes, who may miss some time. We're also going to talk about how the AFC Wild Card race is basically over now, but we will start with the Buffalo Bills beating the Detroit Lions and being in control of the game basically the entire way. Before we do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Geno, Josh Allen does it again. 4 total touchdowns. Looks fantastic. The Bills run the ball down the Detroit Lions' throat. They out-physical the most physical team in the NFL on the road. I know that they lost to the Rams last week, but as I said after that game, I'm not worried about the Buffalo Bills. As I said at the end of last week, the panic over the Bills from that game was completely out of place. This is still the best team in the AFC, and they might be the best team in the NFL.
Joe Brady has now done something that a lot of people have not been able to do with Josh Allen, and that's to go this many games, and I believe it's 7 in a row, scoring 30-plus points, and to drop 48 points on the Detroit Lions, who I believe up until today were the best team in the NFC, at home. You're talking about in Detroit, they were able to go and do that. That Buffalo offense is clicking. Josh Allen is the clear MVP favorite right now. The run game is working for them. The pass game, they don't need a number one. They have enough guys that do enough to get the job done. And the way that they're scoring points, somebody's got to figure out how to stop them. There's got to be a defense in the NFL that can figure out how to stop this offense from scoring 30-plus points. Because when it gets to January, are they going to continue to do this? If they do, nobody's stopping them. You said it. They're a buzzsaw. Like, who's going to stop them if they keep doing this?
Yeah, and I think the reality is with Buffalo, they're going to stop themselves. It would take a mistake-riddled game. It would take Josh Allen being off his game, making mistakes, which we know that, despite how good he's playing, he could still fall into a couple of mistakes here and there that'll always kind of be part of, a side effect of the Josh Allen pill. You know what I mean? So that'll probably be the only way that this Bills team doesn't make it to the Super Bowl is if they beat themselves in a game because they're just so physical. They're built to win. They're balanced. Like they got a lot going. That defense hasn't been great the last few weeks, but they've had some tough offenses to go against as well. I'm just as high as you could possibly be on the Buffalo Bills. On the Detroit Lions side, the losses from the injuries on the defensive side of the ball, I think, are just taking their toll. My guy Matt Derry talked about the loss to Buffalo.
For just the second time this season, the Detroit Lions have lost a football game. They get knocked off by the Buffalo Bills at Ford Field on Sunday, 48-42. Back-to-back games, the Bills score over 40, and for the first time since 2022, the Lions give up 48 in a game at Ford Field under Dan Campbell. Bottom line on this one, Lions could not stop the Bills' run game. Buffalo runs for nearly 200 yards. Josh Allen does his thing as well, throwing for over 360, 2 touchdown passes, 2 rushing touchdowns. Lions depleted defensively. They got knocked around today, and they fall for just the second time this season. Their 11-game win streak is over. More coming up next, right here on Locked On Lions, on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.
The Lions have been withstanding the injuries But I've said for a few weeks now, basically since Thanksgiving, I'm like, at some point, this is going to matter. And their defensive numbers have been insane, but I think this is just them, finally feeling the effects of all the injuries on the defense. The toll comes due.
And figuring out what it's going to be like when you're playing one of the contender teams in the National Football League that you have to be nearly perfect on offense because you don't have the horses on defense to withstand one of these high scoring, and Buffalo is exactly that, offenses in the National Football League. How long can you go through the rest of the season and expect to win games with a ragtag group? If Dan Campbell was going to put together a performance of getting these guys ready to go and have a rallying cry, now would be the time. After that performance, when your whole thing was, we're going to be more tough, more physical, nobody's going to beat us at home, and you get whooped in every single department, you got to figure something out that can get the boys ready to go.
Yeah, and listen, from what we know about Dan Campbell, he's going to have them ready to go, and the reality is they play the Chicago Bears. So I think no matter what, they're going to have a get-right game. If they lose to the Bears, then we really have some crazy conversations. But talking about a team who had some drama but fought through it, the Philadelphia Eagles. And Geno, obviously, you cover the Eagles, so nobody better here. They beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, I believe it was 27-14. They controlled the game most of the day. Philadelphia answered some questions, especially in the pass game in this one, didn't they?
Yeah, 27-13 over Pittsburgh, and mentioned,
the Eagles that extra point on their margin of defeat. Geno, I know you're not going down without letting the record show. There's another point in there.
Oh, without a doubt. I think it's a bigger testament to the defense and how good that they have been. And you said that Buffalo is the toughest team in the league. I'm going to counter that and say after today, Philadelphia was banged up going against Pittsburgh, who is just as physical, man. Punch this team in the mouth. They were bruised and battered, but found a way to do exactly that, to pass the football, to say, hey, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, if we need you guys to go for over 100 yards each because Saquon is a little banged up and for the first time in a long time, he doesn't go for over 100 yards on the ground, they can do exactly that. And Nick Sirianni is the first coach in Eagles history, and this is the first team ever and the first time ever they've gone 10 consecutive regular season games in a row with a victory. And realistically, if they want a chance at the 1 seed to continue to keep pace with Detroit, they have to win out. So you're talking about potentially 13 straight wins if they get to the end of the season here. So we'll see. Depth, that's one thing the Eagles do have. As much as they were bruised and battered, the guys that came and filled in, they did the job. That was a good Pittsburgh team that had been rattling off some big offensive performances. Their defense is exceptional, and they're going to be a team that's going to be a pain in the rear end to have to battle in the playoffs. But if you don't have George Pickens, what is that Pittsburgh offense?
Well, without George Pickens, the Pittsburgh offense really falls apart because the reality is this is something I have been harping on for weeks. They don't have a consistent run game. 17 carries, only 56 rushing yards, 3.3 yards per carry. Pittsburgh is known as a team that relies on defense and running the football because that's currency in the playoffs, but they cannot run the football with success. It's something they can't do. It's going to be their downfall. It was their downfall today. They couldn't sustain drives. And without George Pickens, they don't have the explosive element to compensate for the down-to-down efficiency because of the run game. But that's pretty clear with the Steelers. They need George Pickens going forward, but you got to give credit to the Philadelphia Eagles. They did what they should have done against a Pittsburgh Steelers offense without George Pickens, and that's completely dominate. But with that being said, dominate. Talk about the AFC Wild Card race, folks. It is over. It's Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. My favorite part of the holidays personally is Christmas time. I love Christmas music. I love wrapping the presents, decorating the house with Christmas, the whole thing. I love it. Wrapping myself up in a blanket, watching a good movie as the snow falls. Therapy is also a great way to bring yourself some comfort, except it never goes away, even when the seasons change. I've worked with BetterHelp before. It was a fantastic experience. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, You have to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist. Find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Today's episode is also brought to you by the college football playoffs on TNT. It's that time of year, folks. The college football playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all of the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT's sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, Geno, let's continue today's recap of Week 15 in the NFL. Buffalo is a buzzsaw, and the Eagles put the drama to the side and answer the questions. Now I got to talk about some other answers that we got in Week 16. And the question was, who's going to win the AFC Wild Card spots? Because that question has a resounding answer, and it is the Baltimore Ravens, the Denver Broncos, and the Los Angeles Chargers. There is absolutely no question about it right now that it'll be those three teams, or maybe Baltimore catches Pittsburgh, and then it's Pittsburgh. But either way, the teams that thought they might have a shot to get back into it absolutely do not, and that starts with the Indianapolis Colts, who had a chance to get up early and completely botched it against the Denver Broncos, leading to a big-time loss. And my guy Cody Roark from the Locked On Broncos podcast talked about the big win for the Broncos, clinching a winning season.
The Denver Broncos have secured their first winning season since 2016 with a win over the Colts. It wasn't pretty, but it was gritty. This is Cody Roark, host of Locked On Broncos, and the Broncos overcame a 13-7 deficit to a point where they were about to trail 20-7. Jonathan Taylor fumbled the ball out of the end zone and led to a touchback, and the Broncos scored 24 straight unanswered points. Electrifying performances on the day by Marvin Mims and Nick Bonito in back-to-back games here for the Broncos. They are now 9-5 and have a short turnaround now as they'll take on the Los Angeles Chargers on Thursday Night Football. But the biggest story coming out of this game, the Broncos offense, Bo Nix didn't have their best game. They still found a way to win the game. Nix threw 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, while Pat Surtain left the game with an ankle injury. We'll monitor his status throughout the week. A lot to break down. Check out Locked On Broncos wherever you get your podcasts and more.
What a great time to be a Broncos fan. And Geno, I got to admit, I was wrong about the Broncos and Sean Payton. I didn't think that they had a playoff run in them.
Bo Nix and Sean Payton were a match made in heaven, and I say that not as it is perfection in terms of what is getting done on the field.
Right.
But if there was ever a player that could overcome throwing 3 interceptions, I believe it is Bo Nix, because that is the player he's been since Auburn, and Sean Payton is kind of a guy that can get you in line, and they did that. They had enough on defense to get the job done. I think the Denver Broncos are going to beat the Chargers after the Chargers had just a dreadful performance against the Buccaneers, got the doors blown off them, and they're going to continue to surprise people because Nick Bonito is quietly a top 5 defensive player in the National Football League right now.
Man, his speed, when he gets the ball in his hands, it's kind of crazy. You think about his profile as a player and then see him move that fast, and it's pretty impressive. They've gotten the most out of everybody on defense, and I mean, at 9 wins, there's just no way that they're going to fall apart and miss the playoffs. So congratulations. I was wrong. I will take my L on the Denver Broncos this year. And if you're a team like the Texans, I don't think you want to see the Broncos. I think the Broncos could be trouble for you in the first round of the playoffs if the Broncos were to get that high. I doubt that happens because the Texans will probably be in the 4. Broncos more likely to, get the 3 seed, get the 2 seed, whether that be, Buffalo, or thinking who would the other option be.
Come on, figure out the divisions. You got this.
I'm going. Buffalo, Houston,
East and West. North.
East, West, Chiefs. Just help me out here, Geno. I'm dying. It's late.
All right, so you got the Chiefs, of course. You're going to have from the AFC North, you're going to have either Pittsburgh or Baltimore. From the East, you're going to have the Bills.
Oh, Pittsburgh is really the team that I was looking for in there. Yeah, they're going to get Pittsburgh. They're going to get Houston. They're going to get Buffalo. Houston probably not now, but if the Broncos play the Steelers, I'm going to take the Broncos. I'm going to bet on the Broncos.
Okay, that's interesting. Bo might be a year ahead of schedule with this team. I think him and Sean Payton
going into Pittsburgh is tough.
And that'll be a tough one to go on the road as well. But the seeding right now, that's going to be quite the battle to figure out down the stretch, because you got the AFC North race between those teams just trying to win the division. And then you have the teams in the West who, the Broncos and Chargers, they quite literally play 4 days from now. So much is going to continue to be sorted out. But a lot of that has to do, I think we have to say, the final nail in the coffin, the Miami Dolphins, what a disaster. And you talk about the Indianapolis Colts, botch the season to the nth degree. So hats off to those teams that have already kind of won it, but now let the fun begin and figure out who's the 5 through 7.
Well, speaking of the Dolphins, their season has been a disaster from multiple angles, and losing this game on Sunday, they absolutely could have won, but the offense is what let them down. And my guy Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphins talked about that.
Dolphins fall in Houston to drop their record on the season to 6-8 with 3 games left to play. They are 2-5 away from Hard Rock Stadium this season, and kind of an ugly way to go down, if we're being honest. The Dolphins finished this game winning time of possession, but turning the ball over 4 times. 3 interceptions from Tua Tagovailoa. Certainly elements of those plays that are just not good enough. And I think the issues were abound and plentiful. This game didn't tell me anything I didn't think we already knew about the Dolphins. This is a fundamentally flawed football team, and it became apparent again in another adverse situation on the road against a team that is a playoff contender. And I think that's the gut punch that you have to sit here and take.
I just view the Dolphins as a nerd. They're a nerd where they can outsmart their opponent for quite some time, but at some point, you just got to get in the middle of the ring and overpower your opponent, and they're not able to do it ever. They're just never able to physically win a game. They have to outsmart. They have to outspeed. They could just never physically, through toughness and willpower, win a football game. They always bow down to those teams in those situations, and they're always going to be like that because that's their identity right now.
And when adversity hits, they're unfortunately a team that can't overcome it. We just talked about the Broncos and Bo Nix throwing 3 interceptions. They were still able to find a way to win, and they were almost down in that game 20-7 at one point. The Dolphins, it seems like all season, have just been in these fights where it gets down to it, and there's only one spot left on the lifeboat, and they just get pushed off. They quite literally can't physical their way out of things. And I think we learned a lot about Tua this season. I think we learned a lot about Mike McDaniel. And if this team were to have even gotten to the playoff, Ty, you were saying it, they can't out-physical anybody. Who are they going to upset when push comes to shove, quite literally?
Yeah, no. And then you go back to, you look at the teams who they might be playing outside of Houston, where they played today and got pushed around. They're going to go into Pittsburgh. They're going to go into Buffalo. They're going to go into Baltimore and beat those teams? No, they would have been doomed anyway.
Dog walk them around Orchard Park if they had to go and play them.
100%. But with that being said, the AFC playoff race gets a lot more interesting now because Patrick Mahomes may miss some time. It's Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the final 3 weeks of the NFL season, plus the playoffs right ahead, with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Geno, let's cap off today's edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Talked about Buffalo's buzzsaw, talked about the Philly drama being just noise, talked about the AFC Wild Card race, but now we got some big quarterback injuries. Patrick Mahomes, Geno Smith, and the Patrick Mahomes one looks like he could miss a couple of weeks.
Kansas City Chiefs moved to 13-1 on the season. The question is, what did it cost them? Patrick Mahomes has an ankle injury. We do not know a lot about it right now. We do know that it is a negative on x-ray, so he did not break his ankle, which we kind of figured with the way things were going. He was walking on it. He wasn't being moved on a cart or anything on the field anyway. He did take a cart to get an x-ray. So the question is he going to be available for the game against Houston that will be coming up on Saturday, and then again the next game against the Steelers on Christmas Day? Big questions there, but Kansas City moves to 13-1 on the season. They beat the Cleveland Browns 21-7. This game really wasn't close, and it shouldn't have been as close as it was. The Browns turned the ball over 6 different times, had a bunch of picks that they threw in this game. Kansas City finally had a comfortable win, something that they haven't had much this season. There's much more to talk about on Locked On Chiefs.
I think that Kansas City's in a position where they can actually let Mahomes sit for a couple of weeks and make sure that he's right for the playoffs. They may not win those games, but with the lead that they have right now in the AFC being 13-1, 14-1 right now, there's just no 13-1. There is no need to put him out there for seeding reasons or anything like that. I think it would be wise for Kansas City to make sure that Patrick Mahomes is 100% because they don't have the roster to carry him right now. If he's banged up, he needs to be at full force. And I think that they have earned a position where they can let Patrick Mahomes chill for a little bit.
It would take, catastrophic things to happen for them to not get the #1 seed, even if they were to drop a couple of the games here down the road because of that lead they have on Buffalo. Unlike in the NFC where it's going to come down to a tiebreaker, it would have to take a substantial amount of movement for that to change. So with that being said, it's going to be Carson Wentz's show. And if there's anybody to write a story that would mirror that of somebody named Carson Wentz when Nick Foles did that to him years ago and getting ready for a playoff run and he gets injured, Andy Reid would be the guy to keep this ship afloat. But you rest him, get ready for the playoffs, because this Chiefs team, this team is different. And I don't say that in a positive manner. They're going to need they're going to have to be full force, and they're not winning anything without number 15. You're not going to get a Chad Henne game where you sneak through in the playoffs and win one like you did last year. That's not happening. They need 15. And if he's injured with a high ankle sprain, that's going to limit his movement. He does have to be able to move at times. That is part of his game. That's going to be a tough one to make it through in the cold months when that ankle just tightens up and you move it the wrong way or you fall in a pile the wrong way. You're really susceptible to being re-aggravated. But Patrick Mahomes has had this story so many freaking times.
Yes.
We're like, is this going to hinder them? Is this going to hinder them? And then they hoist another freaking Lombardi trophy, and we're saying, why did we waste all that air on this? But it is a concern. Obviously, at this point in the season, 3 weeks left. They do have that bye week that will be big for them as well, Ty. So he might be able to get a month of rest realistically from this date until the next time he plays, and they could still walk away with the 1 seed. are you complaining if you're a Chiefs fan? I don't know. This might be like a saving grace to a little bit of an extent.
The only issue is their remaining schedule is the Houston Texans, and then 4 days later at the Pittsburgh Steelers, and then right after that at the Denver Broncos. So they don't have any easy ones unless the Broncos seating is completely hemmed up. Like, they don't have any, and they sit players. Like, they don't have any easy games in their final 3. And to make it even worse is the quickness of time. So they're going to play in 6 days against the Texans, and then 5 days after that play the Steelers. They have to play 3 games in 11 days. That is not a great time to have Patrick Mahomes come back. So I think if you sit him now, you lose these 2 games to the Texans and at the Steelers. You bring him back for the last week at Denver, which is a good pass rush. That's dangerous. I guess if they dropped all 3 and sat Mahomes for the rest of the season, maybe that would be the best option just to make sure he's healthy for the playoffs, even if you sacrifice the bye, because you would lose the head-to-head with the Buffalo Bills if both ended with 3 losses. Like, it does make it interesting, but we got plenty of time to talk about the Chiefs and what they're going to do. The Seattle Seahawks have an issue on their hands. We usually focus on Sunday Night Football. Was not a very good game. The Green Bay Packers win that game 30-13. All right. The Seattle Seahawks dropped to 8-6. And now the Los Angeles Rams are in the first seed in the NFC West. And Geno, I took a shot in the dark earlier last week and said, I think that the Rams are a sneaky Super Bowl dark horse in the NFC when they were the 10th seed in the conference. But I didn't care because I saw the vision. I don't believe in Seattle. I do believe in the Rams. The Cardinals got to win over the Patriots, but does anybody trust the Cardinals? With Geno Smith hurt and not finishing this game for the Seahawks, it makes me feel even more confident that the Los Angeles Rams are going to win that division, get that playoff spot, get a home playoff game. And I know that the Minnesota Vikings are good, but what if a banged up Detroit Lions team comes into Los Angeles and the Rams shock the world? I'm just saying, I got Rams fever, Geno, and not to, I feel bad for Geno Smith. I hope he gets better, but the reality is the Seahawks are dead in the air, not the water, for the Seahawks if Geno Smith misses any time.
The story of the Seahawks season has just been quite literally a roller coaster. They've just been going on these runs where it's just consecutive wins and then consecutive losses and then consecutive wins again. And now your quarterback is hurt, and it feels like Sam Howell is not going to be a saving grace to any degree. I would hold up on the Rams Super Bowl take, but they're going to be scrappy because there's a team that
dark horse
we talked about earlier in the NFC that put a pretty good whooping on them a couple weeks ago, and that was the Philadelphia Eagles. But now that does really shift the entirety of the landscape right now.
Right.
Because that doesn't just affect the race in the West. That also affects Washington, how they're looking at the wild card race right now. Because if Seattle, let's say they win this game tonight and Geno Smith is fully healthy, well, the Rams, they're going to be pushing. They're going to just continue to have to win and push for the wild card. Well, they might walk away here with the division. Now you might come down to a Cardinals team pushing for that last wild card spot, or a banged up Seattle team pushing for that last wild card spot. So Washington, they might have been counting their lucky stars after this one, but the Rams are the biggest winner. I think the Rams are the biggest winner of the week. They looked exceptionally good. They're now in the driver's seat to win that division, potentially host a playoff game. Not that that means much because whoever they're playing, the opposing fans will come to that game in droves. But still, when you have Matt Stafford, former Super Bowl winning quarterback, when those guys can find their way into hosting playoff games, and then all of a sudden a team slips up and now they're in a NFC championship game all of a sudden. That's how storylines are written, and the NFC is a gauntlet this year. Whoever wins that, rightfully so, is going to represent the NFC, obviously, in the Super Bowl. But we talk about Buffalo being the best. They gotta beat one of these teams from the NFC, man. It's not going to be an easy out for anybody from the opposing side. Even if Patrick Mahomes is healthy, even if Josh Allen is the MVP, this is one of the better NFCs that we've seen in a long time. Might not have the premier quarterbacks and all the names and everything, but the teams, man, you got some freaking dog teams out there right now.
Well, I think one of the conversations this year has been the lack of a middle class in the NFL. There's a lot of really good teams and a lot of really bad teams, it seems like, which is unusual for a league that's driven by parity. But what I would say is with that comes a lot of great playoff matchups and a lot of teams that are capable of winning a Super Bowl in the NFC. Obviously, the Lions, the Eagles, the Vikings, the Packers look good. Like I know the Rams record isn't as good, but they look fantastic. They could make a run. The Commanders have been really good this year. You know, like all the teams you can kind of point to and be like, I don't really think they're frauds. You know what I mean? And then on the AFC side, same thing. Baltimore could absolutely make a playoff run. You know, the Chiefs, the Bills, like there's just a lot of really good teams going to make for some great playoff matchups, but that's right around the corner. And we're going to be breaking it all down here on the Locked On NFL podcast. So make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. Check out the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL with Tony Wiggins, the barber himself in the barbershop. That's going to do it for me, your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, and my co-host every Monday, Geno Camilleri. And as I tell you, every episode, stay safe out there.